In 20 BCE, Augustus announced a triumph over Parthia. He said he had compelled the empire to return Roman standards lost by 3 armies. The claim was carved into the official account of his reign. But Augustus had not conquered Parthia. He had recovered the standards through diplomacy and turned negotiation into victory propaganda. This is the story of the Parthian, or Arsacid, Empire, Rome's great eastern rival from roughly 247 BCE to 224 CE. Rome defeated it. Roman forces invaded its territory and captured its capital 3 times. But none of those victories became a durable conquest of the Arsacid imperial core. The famous title says this was the empire that terrified Rome. That goes too far. One ancient writer describes fear spreading through one Roman army. The larger history is more complicated and more impressive. Nearly 3 centuries of battles, diplomacy, client kings, contested frontiers, temporary occupations, and 2 empires unable to impose a final settlement. The Arsacid dynasty emerged in northeastern Iran and expanded into lands once controlled by the Seleucid Empire. At different moments, its rulers controlled much of Iran and Mesopotamia, including major cities tied to regional and long-distance exchange. Parthia was Iranian, but it should not be confused with the Sasanian Empire that replaced it in the 3rd century CE. Roman authors sometimes used broad Persian language for Eastern rivals. For this story, the distinction matters. The Arsacids confronted Rome first. The Sasanians inherited and transformed that rivalry later. It also matters how we know them. Much of Parthia's continuous political and military story survives through Greek and Roman authors. Material evidence, coins, art, architecture, and documents reveals societies that cannot be reduced to Rome's enemy. Yet when a battle needs a narrator, we often depend on writers who belonged to Rome's cultural world and wrote long after the events. That problem changes the shape of the documentary. Roman texts naturally give us Roman commanders, Roman losses, Roman diplomatic language, and Roman arguments about Eastern character. They are far less able to tell us how different communities inside the Arsacid realm understood imperial authority or their relationship to the King of Kings. The gaps do not mean Parthia lacked cities, institutions, or political culture. They mean the surviving archive is uneven. The Metropolitan Museum's work on the world between empires offers a useful correction. Communities across the ancient Middle East were not simply pieces on a board controlled from Rome or the Arsacid court. Local identities, languages, religious practices, art, and civic institutions persisted within the zones the 2 powers contested. Parthia's history was larger than its frontier with Rome, even when that frontier dominates the surviving narrative. That imbalance is one reason Parthia can feel less familiar to a modern audience than Rome. It is a possible explanation, not a measurable fact. But it changes the question we must ask. Are we seeing the Arsacid Empire, or Rome's memory of facing it? Rome and Parthia came into formal contact around the early 1st century BCE. The Euphrates emerged as a recurring frontier and diplomatic reference, though it was never a permanently sealed border. Armies, envoys, influence, and client rulers crossed or contested it repeatedly. Then, in 53 BCE, Marcus Licinius Crassus invaded Mesopotamia. Crassus was one of the richest and most powerful men in the Roman Republic. Ancient authors, especially Plutarch, framed his eastern campaign as ambition and private gain. That interpretation belongs to a moral biography written more than a century later. We can establish the invasion. We cannot enter Crassus's mind. Plutarch says Parthian envoys challenged the basis of the campaign. He also describes warnings from people who had encountered Parthian warfare. Their reports emphasized mounted missile fire and heavily armored cavalry. When Crassus's soldiers heard them, Plutarch writes, their courage ebbed away, and they expected great danger. This is the strongest evidence behind the word terrified. It is also much narrower than the title suggests. It is one author's retrospective portrayal of fear inside one army before one battle. Near Carrhae, in northern Mesopotamia, the Roman invasion met a Parthian force commanded by Surena. Ancient sources describe mounted archers sustaining missile fire and heavily armored cavalry threatening close combat. Roman decisions, field conditions, supply, mobility, and command all mattered. The disaster cannot be explained by a single trick or by the phrase Parthian shot. The numbers are less secure than the outcome. Ancient accounts offer troop totals and casualty figures, but scholars dispute what those figures count. A number associated with Surena's followers, or levies, is often repeated as the entire Parthian army. That may not be what the source means. What is secure is devastating enough. The Parthians defeated Crassus's army. Publius, his son, died during the campaign. Crassus also died. Roman standards were captured. Later stories gave Crassus a lurid symbolic death. They do not belong in a factual reconstruction. The historical consequence needs no ornament. A Roman invasion had ended in catastrophic failure, and Parthia now held objects Rome treated as symbols of military honor. Carrhae did not end the rivalry. It defined it. Parthian forces later crossed westward and entered Roman Syria during the turmoil of Rome's civil wars. Cassius Dio, writing much later, says they found Roman military weakness and discontent in parts of the region. His account suggests opportunity and local politics, not an unstoppable march toward Rome itself. Mark Antony also campaigned against Parthia and failed to secure the decisive result he sought. Standards from Roman defeats remained in Parthian hands. Decades after Carrhae, their recovery still carried enough weight for Augustus to build political theater around it. In 20 BCE, diplomacy achieved what another invasion had not. The Parthian king returned standards and prisoners. Augustus's res gestae later declared, "The Parthians I compelled to restore to me the spoils and standards of 3 Roman armies." Compelled is the language of the man receiving the credit. No Roman conquest of Parthia produced the settlement. Augustus converted negotiation into an image of submission, allowing Roman prestige to be restored without another Carrhae. Armenia became another arena where both empires tested power without always fighting directly. It was not empty ground. Armenian rulers and elites pursued their own interests, while Rome and Parthia supported rival dynastic arrangements. In 66 CE, Tiridates, an Arsacid prince, was confirmed as king of Armenia by Nero in Rome. The ceremony could be presented as Roman supremacy, a king receiving his crown from the emperor. But Tiridates remained an Arsacid prince. The arrangement also recognized the limits of exclusive Roman control. This was the recurring pattern. War did not erase diplomacy. Diplomacy did not erase competition. A frontier could be crossed by an army in one generation and managed through dynastic ceremony in another. If the story ended here, the empire Rome could not conquer, might sound like a claim that Rome never reached Parthia's center. It did. Emperor Trajan invaded and captured Ctesiphon in 116 CE. Revolts broke out in newly occupied territories, and after Trajan's death, Hadrian withdrew from much of the eastern expansion. In 165, Roman forces under Avidius Cassius captured Ctesiphon and destroyed the royal palace. In 198, Septimius Severus took and sacked the city again after intense fighting. Ctesiphon stood on the Tigris beside the older city of Seleucia. It became an Arsacid royal center and winter residence within one of the most economically and politically important regions of the empire. Capturing it was therefore a major Roman achievement, but describing it as though it functioned exactly like Rome, as the single center whose permanent loss automatically ended the state, would impose the wrong model on the Arsacid world. The three invasions also unfolded in different political circumstances. Trajan attempted direct provincial expansion. The campaign associated with Avidius Cassius came during another war over Armenia and Mesopotamia. Septimius Severus pursued his own imperial war and public titles. Combining them into a single story of Roman dominance would be as misleading as pretending they never happened. What links them is the same limit: dramatic penetration, followed by no lasting Roman possession of the imperial core. 3 captures of the capital make one myth impossible. Rome did defeat Parthia. It could penetrate deep into Mesopotamia, destroy royal sites, carry away people and treasure, and claim spectacular victories. But a captured capital was not the same as a conquered empire. Roman forces withdrew. Arsacid rulers continued. Distance, revolt, imperial geography, regional power, diplomacy, and the cost of sustaining occupation all helped make temporary victory easier than permanent absorption. The inspected evidence supports these as factors, not as a single ranked formula. That is the precise meaning of the title. Rome could reach Ctesiphon. It could not turn those occupations into a stable Roman future for the Arsacid imperial core. The rivalry lasted because neither side's successes produced a final settlement. Carrhae checked one Roman invasion. It did not establish permanent Parthian superiority. Roman captures of Ctesiphon proved military reach. They did not produce permanent conquest. Armenia's dynastic settlements showed compromise. They did not end competition. Parthia therefore occupies an unusual place in Roman history. It was neither an unconquerable fantasy enemy, nor another kingdom absorbed into the imperial map. It was a durable neighboring empire that forced Rome to alternate among invasion, withdrawal, deterrence, propaganda, and negotiation. That endurance should not be romanticized as permanent unity. Arsacid succession disputes and regional power struggles sometimes gave Rome openings, just as Roman civil wars gave Parthia openings west of the Euphrates. Rome versus Parthia is necessary shorthand, but both names conceal political systems that changed over generations. The most accurate measure of the rivalry is not a final score. It is the repeated failure of victories to remain final. In 224 CE, the Arsacid Empire fell. But Rome did not destroy it. Ardashir defeated the last Arsacid king, Artabanus, and established the Sasanian dynasty. The new Iranian Empire would confront Rome and its eastern continuation for centuries more. That ending corrects both versions of the myth. Parthia was not an empire that kept all Rome terrified. Roman armies invaded it, defeated it, and occupied its capital. But Parthia was also not a temporary obstacle erased by Roman expansion. It survived repeated invasions and ended through an internal Iranian dynastic revolution. Its history is most visible when we resist Rome's preferred categories: victory or submission, civilization or barbarism, conqueror or conquered. At Carrhae, a Roman army discovered that expansion had limits. Under Augustus, diplomacy was recast as triumph. At Ctesiphon, conquest repeatedly proved temporary. And in Armenia, supremacy had to coexist with compromise. Parthia did not terrify Rome forever. It did something more consequential. It forced Rome to live with a rival it could defeat, but could not make disappear.